Mark Carney told us that one man saved Canada in 2008. Him. That's right. He said he did it. Well, I'm here to tell you that we've been sold a bill of goods, a myth. And while Canadians were losing sleep back then over jobs and pensions, it wasn't a Bay Street banker in an ivory tower who dragged us back from the brink. It was boots on the ground. It was hard hats on scaffolds and a government that put shovels in the dirt. It was the leadership of Jim Flaherty and the Conservative government at the time that powered Canada's rebound, not some magic trick played at the Bank of Canada. Today, I'm as frustrated as you. We are well past the election campaign and now just disproving this, but we need to disprove it. Because we've been fed false hero story after false hero story from Mark Carney about all the things that he's done. So buckle up, Canada. It's time to set the record straight and hold on to your hats. There's a lot of lies in here. Let's go.
Welcome to Bakes on Things.
During the 2025 election campaign, Mark Carney would have us believe that he was the man who saved Canada in 2008, the great financial crisis, the Great Recession. And I'm here to tell you, you've been sold a bill of goods, a myth. See, while Canadians were losing sleep back then over jobs and their pensions, it wasn't a Bay Street banker in an ivory tower who dragged us back from the brink of extinction as a country. It was boots on the ground. It was hard hats on scaffolding and a government that put shovels in the dirt, that put us to work right away. It was the leadership of Jim Flaherty and the Conservative government at the time under Stephen Harper that powered Canada's rebound. Not some magic trick at the Bank of Canada like Mark Carney would have had you believe. Today, I'm as frustrated as you are. Frustrated that hardworking Canadians have been fed a false hero story throughout the election and we weren't able to check it because the election news cycle was too fast. I'm frustrated that our current leaders learned nothing from the 2008 crash and are sleepwalking into another crisis yet again. Buckle up, Canada. It's time to set the record straight on 2008 and hold our leaders to account. And it's ugly. Let's go. Welcome back to Bakes on Things. Let's flash back to autumn 2008. The world's financial system was in free fall. Stock markets crashed, factories shuttered to a halt, and families here in Canada watched in dread as their savings vanished overnight. South of our border, big banks were toppling like dominoes. Fear gripped Canada too. I mean, after all, we're a trading nation, and when our biggest customer, the US, sounding familiar, catches pneumonia, well, we get the chills too. By late 2008, Canada was sliding into recession. Real GDP was contracting, and jobs were on the line. We faced the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and Canadians everywhere, coast to coast, wondered, how the hell are we going to get through this? Enter Jim Flaherty, our finance minister at the time under Stephen Harper's government with Stephen Harper's full backing. Instead of shrugging or panicking, Flaherty, God rest his soul, rolled out Canada's Economic Action Plan. Remember that? It was a bold $60 billion stimulus strategy to shield Canadian families and put people back to work. And this wasn't pie in the sky theory stuff. It was concrete, literally concrete. Major investments in infrastructure were the heart of this entire plan, and it worked. I mean, we're talking roads, we're talking bridges, we're talking highways, broadband internet, labs, border crossings, even pipelines. All things blocked by C-69 today. Real tangible projects to modernize our nation and create jobs. The 2009 budget, yes, we did budgets back then, earmarked $12 billion for new infrastructure stimulus and billions more for housing and renovations. Jim Flaherty didn't even stop there. He pumped $2.7 billion into urgent loans for the auto sector to keep manufacturing alive in partnership with the United States, and $1.5 billion into job training for laid off workers. There were tax cuts for families started before this crisis even began, credits for home renovations and extended EI benefits, all claimed, all aimed at helping all aimed at helping ordinary Canadians hang on through the storm. And guess what? It worked. By mid 2009, even as other countries were still flat on their backs and faces, cranes and bulldozers were roaring across Canada. They were roaring to life. The government had commitments in place for nearly 16,000 projects nationwide, with over 12,000 already started, like boots on the ground, shovels in the ground, or even completed by 2010. Those projects weren't just statistics. They were real Canadians repairing bridges in New Brunswick, laying broadband cable in rural Alberta, twinning highways in Saskatchewan, and upgrading colleges in Ontario. All that activity created or maintained an estimated 130,000 jobs by the summer of 2009 alone. 130,000 families could breathe easier because of the Economic Action Plan and the action taken as part of it. In fact, the plan was on track to safeguard 220,000 jobs in total by 2010. Instead of a lost decade, Canada saw hope on the horizon. Don't take my word for it. Canada's GDP proves it, which had plunged by 2.5% in 2009 and recovered to 3.1% in 2010. One of the strongest turnarounds in the G7 ever. Think about that. Amid a worldwide recession, Canada's economy was growing again within 1 year. Why? Because Flaherty acted boldly and swiftly. He invested in Canada. He invested in our people, our infrastructure, our key industries. He even fought to save our manufacturing heartland, coordinating a multi-billion-dollar rescue of automakers. When GM and Chrysler were on the brink, Flaherty refused to let Ontario's factories become ghost towns. His team, with the help of Ontario and the United States, injected loans and took equity stakes to keep those companies alive, determined to preserve Canada's 20% share of North America's auto production, something we would dream to continue to preserve today. Thousands of auto workers, folks who would have been jobless after this, continued putting paychecks in their bank accounts, in their pockets, because of that decision. That is what real economic leadership actually looks like. Targeted support, real projects, real jobs, and action. Shovels in the ground. Meanwhile, the consequences of Flaherty's choices were visible in communities across the country. Construction workers, electricians, engineers, they all had work. Rebuilding aging roads and water systems. Families saw new affordable housing units spring up across the country thanks to $2 billion in housing investments. Not CCANs, housing investments. Ownership of the houses. Small businesses got a boost from tax relief and infrastructure contracts. This was a nationwide effort to stimulate demand and confidence, and it worked. And it gave Canadians a sense that we could ride out the storm together. When Jim Flaherty said Canada will emerge from this recession with a more modern and greener infrastructure, he meant it. And by 2010, projects from community centers to clean energy facilities had broken ground across the country, ensuring long-term benefits well beyond the immediate jobs. This was an insanely fast recovery. And make no mistake, it wasn't painless. We did run deficits to pay for this. We know that. So before you liberals jump in the comments and talk about the deficits, I'm going to give them to you now. About $55 billion in 2009 and 2010. But here's the thing. Those deficits were a lifeline with actual work put behind them, not just spending that disappears. They put food on tables by creating paychecks. They kept our economy afloat, and it's proven. When private sector spending collapsed, the government was there. And as soon as growth returned, the Conservatives laid out plans to get back to balance, something Mark Carney has zero plans to do so far, which Flaherty eventually did, in fact, do before he left office. So the bottom line, when the chips were down in 2008 and 2009, it was the Economic Action Plan, infrastructure, stimulus, and targeted aid that saved Canada's economy. That's the truth. It's backed by the numbers and the lived experiences for all of us Canadians who lived at that time, from coast to coast. Now, what about the Carney myth that he did it versus the reality? Where does Mark Carney come into this? Did he have any impact? See, if you listen to the media back then, or to Carney himself now, or the media now, you'd think Mark Carney walked on water and single handedly saved Canada. Well, actually, mostly that's just now that he claims that. Let's give Mark Carney his due, though. He was governor of the Bank of Canada during the crisis, and yes, the bank did its job. It slashed interest rates rapidly, and it pumped liquidity into the financial system, which didn't go unnoticed. That undoubtedly did help. Carney's monetary policy was indeed timely at the time. Here's the thing. The OECD later noted that Canada's quick rebound was thanks to a combination of timely monetary and fiscal stimulus, a sound financial system, and high commodity prices. But when it came to the Bank of Canada's decisions, Mark Carney would have you believe he was innovative, except many of the G7 countries were doing the same things. That's the kicker. Only one of those factors was Carney's doing it at all anyway, from what the OECD said. The other pieces of the puzzle, the big government stimulus, the rock solid banks, and the boost from oil and metal prices, had absolutely nothing to do with Mark Carney's supposed wizardry. He wasn't the architect of the stimulus, that was Flaherty. He didn't create Canada's conservative banking culture, and he certainly didn't conjure up global commodity markets. How could one man do so? Yet Carney basked in the praise as the Canadian who saved banking and will save us again in this crisis of a lifetime. The working class hero, just in a fancy suit. Well, the British press were so smitten, they hired him to run the Bank of England a few years later. Meanwhile, the real hero of the hour, Jim Flaherty, quietly went on doing his job, not seeking any applause from anybody, and that makes it infuriating given that we now know Jim Flaherty has passed. To see the credit stolen from those who actually made the tough calls is actually making me livid. Former PM Stephen Harper has finally said that what we all need to hear, which is, I have listened with increasing disbelief to Mark Carney's attempts to take credit for things he had little or nothing to do with back then. Let me be very clear. The hard calls during the 2008-2009 global financial crisis were made by Jim Flaherty. That's what Stephen Harper said. That's coming from Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister who led Canada at the time, who led Canada through that crisis, and fully gives Jim Flaherty the credit for that. He saw up close who was in the trenches making decisions. And by the way, liberals and anybody else that's listening, it wasn't Mark Carney. Harper is clearly fed up with Carney's revisionist history tour. He continues to talk about it even post-election, and so am I. Let's break the myth down point by point. Monetary policy, yes, the Bank of Canada cuts rates to near zero. Exactly what the US Fed and other central banks did along the same lines at the same time across the world. Carney just did his job, and there's no doubt about that, but interest rates alone weren't unique to Canada. And they weren't sufficient enough to spare us the trouble. Bank regulation? Well, Canada's banks stayed solid through the crisis. And that's true, but why? Because for decades we had already had in place strict oversight and a culture of prudent lending, not because of Mark Carney. Carney had served at the finance department briefly, but he didn't invent Canada's banking system. But he sure seems to claim he did. Our banks avoided the subprime madness largely due to the fact they didn't participate in it at all, due to policies that they placed long before Carney ever showed up. In short, Canada's fundamentals were strong back then already, thanks to former governments paying down debt in the 1990s and a conservative financial sector who was working day and night at it. Those strengths made Carney's job a lot easier than his counterparts, as the BBC's economics editor actually noted. And then there's fiscal policy, the elephant in the room. It was fiscal stimulus, Flaherty's action plan that filled the void when private demand cratered. Carney had zero control of that, had zero control over government spending whatsoever. So, how could this have been him? That was Parliament's domain. And that's where the heavy lifting actually happened. The OECD explicitly credited Canada's rapid recovery to the combination of stimulus and sound finances. But the sound finances were not solely what created this recovery in the first place, and also not to Carney alone. Yet here we are in 2025, post election, and Mark Carney was running for prime minister on this potential lie that he had been the guy who managed the 2008 crisis. During his leadership campaign, Carney actually suggested that his actions as Bank of Canada governor, like cutting rates, were the key stimulus factor to Canada weathering that storm. But that's false, because it was the things that created employment and kept employment that actually kept Canada strong through that time. So give me a break here, Mark. Canadians weathered the storm because of all hands on deck. The federal and provincial governments, ordinary Canadians tightening their belts, and yes, your Bank of Canada too at the time. But Mark, you were one player on a big team. As Stephen Harper bluntly put it, Carney did not oversee the day to day management of Canada's economy and never did during that crisis. He wasn't in those late night cabinet meetings deciding how to save the auto industry or which infrastructure projects to fast track. Jim Flaherty was. Flaherty was the one agonizing over how to maximize stimulus impact without letting the deficit spiral out of control. Flaherty was the one who had to stand up in the House of Commons, face the opposition, and get that emergency budget passed in early 2009. Jim Flaherty, not Mark Carney. And Mark Carney, well, he gave some good advice and did what central bankers do. Important, yes, but not the whole story of our recovery. Look, Mark Carney is a smart guy. I'll give him that. He's a competent central banker. But this idea that he was the savior of 2008 is pure media hype and baloney. And it's all just liberal propaganda and marketing. The real truth here is that Canada's resilience in 2008, 2009 was already proven and was a team effort. And Flaherty's fiscal muscle was the real knockout punch that kept us standing in the first place. Even Carney's own campaign seems to know his record alone isn't enough, because when Harper called him out for taking undue credit, Carney's team scrambled to quote Harper's past praise on Mark Carney. Surprise, surprise. As if that changes the actual facts of what happened in 2008, 2009. Nice try, but no. We won't let history be rewritten here. Carney may have gotten a golden halo in the press, but it was Flaherty who rolled up his sleeves and actually got dirt under his nails to save the jobs and homes. Canadians deserve to know that. From 2008 to today, trade wars, stagnation, and no plan continue to baffle us. Fast forward to this moment right now, and we're facing the crisis of a lifetime. It's different, but with echoes of 2008. The global economy is shaky again. Instead of a banking meltdown, we have a trade war and a stagnating economy. Inflation spiked, interest rates shot up, and growth has ground to a halt. The U.S., now led by a protectionist president in Donald Trump, yes, Donald Trump again. Canada is suffering from these tariffs on the daily. Our exporters from steel mills in Hamilton to lumber yards in BC are getting pummeled by American tariffs and America First policies. We're also grappling with a hangover from COVID and global supply chain chaos. Canadians are feeling the pain every time they buy groceries or fill up their gas tanks. Wages aren't keeping up. Jobs in key sectors are insecure. And the buzzword you hear is slowdown. In fact, some experts warn that Canada is teetering on the edge of a massive recession again. Forecasts for our GDP growth, think about the early numbers in this episode. In 2025, the forecasts are as low as 0.1%, so essentially zero. That's right. After all this liberal spending and talking points, our economy continues to flatline. And who's at the helm? Mark Carney, Mr. Crisis Manager himself, is now the Prime Minister. This is the moment he promised he was made for. He sold himself as the seasoned economic leader who could stand up to Trump and navigate choppy waters. Unlike my opponent, Unlike my opponent, he would say, I've managed economies and crises before, Carney boasted over and over and over and over and over again. Well, Mark, here we are, more than 30 days past you winning the election. We're living in your economy now. So where's that masterful leadership? Because from where Canadians sit, it sure feels like we're adrift. Carney's government has been eerily low energy and low imagination. Instead of hitting the ground running with a bold plan like Flaherty did, Carney gave us technocratic tinkering. He axed the consumer carbon tax, but really just brought it to zero, which I guess was finally some relief on gas and heating. And he scrapped a capital gains tax hike that was probably never going to exist anyway because it was ridiculous. Fine, but that's just undoing a couple of Trudeau era burdens. Where's the forward motion here? Where's the big vision to get Canada out of this rut? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Carney is doing next to nothing to tackle the one thing that could truly jumpstart our economy: building things. You want to stand up to Trump's trade aggression? We have proof in the past that this works. So make Canada more competitive. Build export infrastructure. Open up new markets. Exploit our abundant resources so we're not dependent on the US for everything. But Carney's liberals are paralyzed. They're stuck in their own ways. Our manufacturing sector is still waiting for some kind of support or strategy as supply chains realign. Investment in Canada is drying up because companies don't see a friendly environment here. They see red tape, they see taxes, and endless delays. Under Carney's watch, a continuation of Trudeau's watch really here is no matter or no major nation no major nation building projects are getting done. Contrast that with 2009 when we had thousands of projects on the go. It's not the same today. Today, can you name a single big project that this government has started and finished? I realize they're a new government, so just stick with the started. What have we started? Pipelines? No. Major mines or ports? No. We're stuck in bureaucratic hell yet again. Highways or high speed rail? No. It's one long list of cancellations and a maybe someday, and this is at the time when we desperately need investment to counteract the trade war's damage. Why is nothing getting built? One huge reason is they know they still have C-69 in place, the infamous No More Pipelines law. They passed this, the Liberals, in 2019. And if you haven't heard of it, Bill C-69 basically overhauled how major projects get approved in Canada. It sounded nice. More investment of environmental and social impacts. But in practice, it's been an absolute disaster. It created so much bureaucracy and uncertainty that investors just threw up their hands and walked away. Under this law, even routine projects can get bogged down for years and years in studies and consultations and political meddling. It's exactly the kind of heavy handed overreach that strangles growth today. Don't take my word for it, just simply look at the results. Since Bill C-69 came into force, more than 25 major resource and infrastructure projects have been completely delayed or outright abandoned across this country. And according to industry groups from all of our different provinces who track these sort of things, that's billions of dollars in lost investment, thousands of jobs lost or never created that could have been created but gone. Energy pipelines, mining developments, even highway improvements, all harder to get approved now. The Supreme Court of Canada even ruled parts of C-69 unconstitutional for overstepping federal powers. But yet it still exists and is still getting in the way. I mean, for crying out loud, you'd think a sane government would reconsider the whole mess after this. But what does Prime Minister Carney do and his liberal goons? Does he admit that the law is flawed and pledge to fix it? No, he doubles down. In fact, during his campaign and early tenure so far, Carney explicitly stated that he will not repeal Bill C-69, the very law that prevents new pipelines from being built and other infrastructure projects like the ones Flaherty engaged in back in 2008 to rescue us. Yep, you heard that right. The guy who says we need to act forcefully to harness Canada's resources to get projects going in the face of Donald Trump's tariffs doesn't want to repeal the bill that would do exactly that. The guy who talks about building infrastructure to unite the country, that same guy refuses to remove the biggest roadblock to getting any of this stuff done. Talk about a flaming contradiction. Carney went around thumping his chest during the election campaign that he'd unleash Canada's resource wealth to fight the trade war, harvest Canada's wealth of natural resources. In his words, those are the things he said. But then, when a reporter pressed him on it, how are you going to build pipelines or highways if you keep C-69 in place? Carney's response, of course, was a flat and very flat, let's be honest. We do not plan to repeal Bill C-69. Full stop, point final. Basically, we'll talk a big game about it. We'll talk a big game about infrastructure, but we won't actually change the policy that blocks infrastructure. Therefore, we can just blame the policy that blocks infrastructure when we don't actually get any of this done. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Carney's trying to save, or trying to have it both ways, I should say. He wants to appease environmentalists and the far left wing of his party by keeping C-69 in place, while also pretending to Canadians he's pro-development. It doesn't work like that, Mark. You can't just say one thing and do the other, and then do the other and say the one thing. And Canadians are not fools. They can see the jobs not being created. They see provinces like Alberta furious and trying to get out of here. They see that no new pipelines can get built to Tidewater, even as the U.S. happily expands its pipelines and spends billions. They see indigenous communities frustrated that energy and mining projects that could bring real prosperity are stuck in limbo due to endless federal policies and red tape. Even moderate voices are saying enough. The Progressive Contractors Association of Canada and the Independent Contractors and Business Association, these are organizations that represent thousands of workers and entrepreneurs. Well, they've blasted Carney. They've blasted Carney's stance on all of this. And in a joint statement, they warned that keeping Bill C-69 will stall or cancel critical natural resource projects and signaled that Trudeau-era hospitality development lives on. I mean, how can we possibly let that live on? This is beyond asinine at this point. And they're right. By clinging to C-69, Carney is basically hanging a closed for business sign right on Canada's front door. Carney's people already know it's a bad look too. There's talk they might introduce some kind of workaround now, like a fast track process for a new national interest projects way of getting these things done. We've heard murmurs of a bill to somehow go around Bill C-69 on certain things. What? Just repeal the damn thing. Carney has mused about accepting provincial environmental assessments and using a one project, one approval approach or principle for big projects. But why create all of this? Why hire consultants for all of this when you just simply need to repeal a bill? In other words, an admission that the current system is broken is just not coming. But why dance around it with half measures? Why not just scrap the damn law and replace it with something that actually balances environment and economy without killing investment too? Instead, we get ambiguities, likely because Carney doesn't want to anger the anti-grown ideologues and anti-growth, I should say, ideologues in his base that he has. So here we are. In the middle of a new economic crisis, Canada has its hands tied behind its back. We can't even build the projects that would create these jobs in the first place. We can't strengthen our energy sector, and we can't reduce reliance on the US because our leader lacks the guts to actually engage in completing any of these projects, including removing the shackles. Bill C-69 is literally blocking the kind of nation-building projects that saved us back in 2009. And Carney's Liberals are too cowardly or too stubborn to fix it. Let me spell this out for you. In 2009, infrastructure and resource projects were our salvation. In 2025, they're our missed opportunity. We should right now be launching another economic action plan, a stimulus focused on trade enabling infrastructure, from pipelines and railways to ports and power grids. We should be fast tracking LNG terminals to export Canadian gas, especially with Europe, needing stable energy. Oh, wait, who is all of this sounding like? We should be building an east-west energy corridor, investing in manufacturing and critical minerals to ally-proof our support chains or supply chains. We could be doing all that if not for policies like Bill C-69 and the lack of political will in the Carney government. Instead, investment is fleeing to the US as usual and elsewhere as well. Our growth is sputtering at 0%, and Carney's out there lecturing us about experience. Give me a break. Enough talk. Time for action. Repeal C-69 and reclaim Canada's future. Canada, I'm speaking to you now from the heart. This is one of our longer episodes because we've been here before and we need to address this. We've seen our economy on the ropes and we know what it takes to fight back. In 2008, 2009, we had a government that didn't hesitate to use every tool in the toolbox to protect Canadians, but they actually used the tools. They spent on infrastructure, they cut red tape, they supported key industries, and they did it together across party lines. Remember that even the liberals of that era ultimately voted for Flaherty's budget because it was the right thing to do at the time, and it put workers into work in action right away. That's the spirit we need again today. But what do we have instead? A prime minister who seems more concerned with virtue signaling and protecting a bad liberal legacy than with putting Canadians back to work. This cannot stand. We must hold this government accountable at all times throughout the next, hopefully not, but up to 4 years, starting right now. I'm calling on every Canadian who cares about our economic future. Raise our voices. Let's raise our voices. Do more than you've done before to raise your voice. Demand that your MPs, liberals or otherwise, repeal Bill C-69. Not tweak it, not rebrand it, repeal it. Scrap the No Pipelines Act so we can unleash real nation building projects again. Tell them we need to get Canada working. Greenlight that energy corridor. Build those pipelines responsibly. Approve the mines for critical minerals so that our auto tech sectors can thrive. Expand our highways and rail to get Canadian goods to global markets. We did it in 2009, and we can do it here again in 2025. But not if we're strangled by bad law and timid leadership. And while we're at it, let's remember who had the successful playbook. The Conservatives in 2008. From 2008 to 2010, they showed a winning strategy. They invested in our country's productive capacity, and we need to do it again. They didn't chase away investment with endless red tape. They welcomed it. They trusted Canadian workers and businesses to rise to the challenge if given the opportunity. We need to return to that mindset. And that means cutting taxes, like Pierre Poilievre said, cutting taxes that punish entrepreneurs, removing barriers like C-69, and prioritizing infrastructure that leaves a legacy for future generations. It means being unashamed to develop Canada's natural resources, the most ethically and cleanly produced resources in the world. Rather than offshoring our needs to regimes with lower standards, it means standing up proudly and saving Canada. And we need to say Canada is open for business and ready to build. So here's my call to action for all of you viewers out there. The citizen, the taxpayer, fed up with this stagnation. Don't let them spin you a false story. We already saw many of those during the election. Don't buy the convenient tale that a technocrat saved us before and we should all just trust him to do it again, because he never did it in the first place. Look at the facts. In 2008, Canadians saved Canadians through grit and a government that empowered its people. Today, we need to save Canadians again, perhaps from the very man who claims he was our savior before. We need to hold Carney's government to the fire. Write to your member of parliament. Grill them on why, in a time of national economic peril, they're clinging to a law that even the Supreme Court slams, and that experts say has killed 25 major projects already. Ask them why Canada is virtually the only G7 country that can't get its resources to market, even as war and crisis make those resources more valuable than ever. Demand better, Canada. Demand the immediate repeal of C-69 and the launch of a real stimulus package, a nation-building plan 2.0, modeled on what worked already. Use history as a lesson from 2008 to 2010. And if they won't listen, well, an election maybe isn't that far off after all. Politicians have a way of hearing the message when their jobs are on the line. I'll say this clearly. Any government that keeps strangling our potential doesn't deserve to stay in power, no matter how long. We need leaders who are unafraid to make bold decisions, the kind that Jim Flaherty made, the kind that Pierre Poilievre and others are championing, and championing now with proposals for energy corridors and massive infrastructure pushes. It's so important that you stay engaged right now. It's so important that this sort of vision that built this country, from the railways of Sir John A. to the St. Lawrence Seaway, we used to celebrate nation building in Canada. Let's do it again. So, to wrap this up, let me be absolutely clear. I know this has been a long one, and thanks for sticking with me. Canada's 2008 to 2009 recovery was no accident, and it sure as heck wasn't thanks to one central banker's cleverness. It was thanks to leadership that believed in Canada, leadership that knew building, drilling, innovating, and working hard were going to be the keys to prosperity. We are at a crossroads in 2025. We can choose to keep believing a comforting myth that allows us to remain stuck, or we can face reality and choose a better path. I know what choice I want to make. I choose the Canada that builds things. I choose the Canada that isn't afraid to get its hands dirty to secure a better future. I choose to stand with the workers, the engineers, the farmers, and the energy crews, all the Canadians who just want to get back to doing what they do best, which is growing our economy. It's time to reclaim the spirit of 2008 2010, repeal Bill C-69, unleash Canadian projects, hold this government's feet to the fire, and don't let them distract you with fairy tales about who saved us in the past. We know what works because we've lived it. If you're my age, you went through the 2008 crisis. Now let's do it again. Let's attack it. Let's be offensive and protect Canada's economy for the generations to come. All right, enough talk. It's time to act. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you tomorrow.